Hello everyone, and welcome to the next part in this new series of tutorial videos for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 and the Airbus A320neo. So in this part of our tutorial today, we're going to be looking at basically pushing back from the terminal and taxiing to the active runway and everything we need to do whilst that is taking place. If you haven't checked out the other tutorial videos up until this point, please do go and check those out, so you're on board with everything that has happened so far. So we're currently at London Gatwick, and as I look around, this is the freeware scenery that is available for London Gatwick for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, and it looks fantastic, so go and check that out as well if you haven't already. We have finished our cockpit preparation, and we have just finished setting up the flight management guidance computer and the McDo, etc. And we've put our route in from SimBrief that we calculated and made earlier. That's now all set up, and we're ready to do our departure briefing and get our clearance from air traffic control. So as you can see, everything is up and running, and as I say, here's our flight plan all already coded in as we did in the last tutorial. So what we would do at this point then, before going any further, is we would do what's called our departure briefing. Now the departure briefing basically looks at what the weather is like, if there's any issues with the aircraft, are there any NOTAMs that we need to be aware of in the operational flight plan that SimBrief gave us, and of course any threats to take into consideration. What this normally means then, the weather is pretty self-explanatory. Things like if there's any winds that you need to be aware of, is it gusting, are we within limitations for actually taking off. There are times when takeoff is not advised, for example if there is wet ice on the runway or water on top of compacted snow, or dry snow or wet snow over the top of ice, etc., things like that. In terms of the wind, maximum takeoff limitation for the Airbus A320 is 35 knots, and that also includes gusts as well. So stuff like that, basically those threats, just make sure that everything is fine with the weather. The aircraft are probably not applicable here in Flight Sim 2020, as we would hope the aircraft is in peak working condition. NOTAMs, we explained a little bit about those in SimBrief. A lot of them, again, not really applicable to the flight simulator, but sometimes you do get NOTAMs in the ATIS if you're flying on VATSIM, so always worth checking those as well. Then we come to the threats, and the threats are basically, if anything goes wrong, what are we going to do about it? So if we took off today, we went past V1 speed, we have to continue because we don't have enough space on the runway to stop safely, so we have to take off. If there was an engine fire or something went wrong with an engine, we lost an engine, a bird strike, anything like that, what is our main course of action? What are we going to do? So in this case, we need to know what the minimum safe altitude is around the airport, which you can get from Navigraph charts if you've got that. Here at Gatwick on departure, it's 2,100 feet to the south of the field. If we had a problem, could we come back and land at Gatwick? Well, the weather outside today is good, so nothing wrong with that. And also, if we have a look at our weight here, our weight at the moment is just short of 65 tons, and the maximum landing weight of the A320 is 67.4 tons, so we're well below the maximum landing weight. So if we did have a problem, we could come back here and land at Gatwick, no problem at all. If, for example, the weather was really bad and it was, say, below Cat 1 minimums, and realistically we'd have to try and perform an auto land, then, and you were also above the maximum landing weight, then perhaps returning to Gatwick in those sorts of conditions may not be advisable, and we'd look to divert to somewhere with better weather that we could do so safely. But stuff like that doesn't usually happen in the flight simulator, of course, unless you particularly want it to, and we may look at doing things like emergency briefs following a problem with an engine or something like that on departure in later tutorials. So that's basically a little departure briefing. After we've done that, we then contact air traffic control and make sure we've got our departure clearance and then we would run our before start checklist. So cockpit preparation is completed. Cockpit signs are all on, so the seat belts and the no smoking or no portable devices sign is on, as well as our emergency exit lights are now armed. The ADIRs are aligned and we're set to nav mode. The fuel quantity is loaded, set and balanced, and our flight management guidance system is all set in the McDo as well. Altimeter is set on both sides and cross-checked, 1004, 1004. That might be different from the last video you saw, just because of course the weather is different as I'm filming this this today. But make sure they're set to the current QNH setting wherever you are. After that then, we will look at getting ready to taxi. So once we're happy with that, we would request our pushback clearance from air traffic control. So we contact air traffic control, get our pushback clearance. Once that had been obtained, we'd begin by turning on the rotating beacon light. I've just noticed actually as I've come up here, the APU isn't started. So when would we start the APU? Well, in really warm countries, of course, you want to get the APU started as soon as possible, because it gets very warm on an aircraft when in warmer climates. Here in Gatwick, of course, in the middle of winter as this video is being filmed, that's not so much of an issue. So you could start the APU as soon as you wanted as part of the cockpit preparation once you've gone through, done the engine fire test, etc. for the APU up here. However, if you do have Navigraph charts, you will read that quite a lot of the time the APU is not allowed to be started too soon. Some say no more than 5, no more than 10 minutes before departure. So you don't want to be starting that too soon if the airport tells you you can't. Once you've selected the APU master switch, you must leave at least 3 seconds before pressing the start button. So the APU starter is now firing up. I know you've seen this as well in the previous tutorial videos, so I'm just going to let that fire up. What we're going to do now is, whilst that fires up, as I said, we would get our pushback clearance, and once we got that, we could go ahead and turn on our rotating beacon light. So the rotating beacon light is the light that you can now see flashing here. This tells the ground crew that soon we'll be pushing back, and more importantly for them, the engines are going to be started. So we'll have a look at doing that as well in a moment. Once the rotating beacon light is on, we need to we'll need to get the tug. Now there are two ways in Microsoft Flight Simulator that you can get the tug. One is to actually contact air traffic control using the ground services, tune Gatwick ground, and then you can request the pushback up here, and then you have to tell the pushback to turn left and right. Now I found that to be a little bit clunky, so there's a great little add-on which I use called Pushback Helper, available from flightsim.to. It's free, get that downloaded, and it's just a very little simple standalone program that runs alongside FlightSim 2020. Launch it after you're inside the flight deck and it'll automatically connect to your simulator, and you can then use this to call the tug. So if we now call the tug, here he comes. And one of the things that you'll also see now down here on the upper ECAM is the nose wheel steering has been disconnected. This means now that you've got no control over the steering of the aircraft, which is exactly as it should. Check the AccuBrake pressure, which in Flight Simulator at the moment is always in the green and ready. We would then turn our transponder, which is down here, onto auto, like so. Parking brake is set. Make sure that that is on and that our thrust levers are at idle before we begin starting the engines. Just check out the APU is doing. So the APU is now available, so start APU bleed. So the APU engine is now providing air to the engines and of course the cabin as well. So APU bleed is now on. We can begin our pushback. So in order to begin the pushback, we would release the parking brake like so, and then using the pushback helper we can tell it to start pushing the aircraft back and reverse. Whilst that is then taking place, we can start engine 1. To do that, you come down to the center pedestal, and the engine mode selector, turn to ignition and announce engine 1 start. So engine 1 is now starting, and you'll start to see the numbers here climbing on the upper ECAM for the engine. Whilst that's taking place, I tend to then just have a look outside at our pushback. Very difficult, of course, when sat in the flight deck to gauge how well the pushback is going, so definitely better from an outside point of view. You can also hear engine number 1 is starting. The other great thing about that little pushback helper add-on is you can actually control the speed of the taxi. So while pushing back in a straight line, you can perhaps speed him up a little bit. We can then just slow him down as we tell him to start pushing the aircraft back towards the left. And it's really trying to judge how well you can get him to push you and line you back up with that taxiway. We've not got this quite right, but never mind. So whilst he's doing that, let's just quickly jump back inside the flight deck. So engine is now stabilized at 19.5% N1, starting engine 2. And we can tell the tug to actually hold us there, because he's not going to push us back perfectly on this line just now. Once the pushback has completed, you need to set the parking brakes. You can either do this using the pushback helper or just come back into the flight deck and of course set parking brakes there. Engines are now running, so cockpit doors should be locked. And all we're looking for now on here is on the upper ECAM. Engine 2 is now starting. You'll see in a moment this will say avail to let you know that this is available. So we can also tell the tug driver now that we are done with him. Again, this is using pushback helper, so we can send the tug away. There he goes. And we should also notice that the nose wheel is no longer disconnected from steering. That little warning is now gone. Here we are then. Both engines are stabilised at 19.5% N1. So after a successful engine 2 start, we come back to the engine mode selector and select norm. APU bleed can now come off. Engine anti-ice, we'd need to have decided, depending on what sort of day it is, whether you're using engine anti-ice for your departure or not. Remember, of course, if you are using a flex temp takeoff, you need to make sure if you are going to use anti-ice that has been taken into account through your performance and flex temp calculations. That was shown in one of the previous tutorials. So, given the fact that I'm filming this in the middle of winter and there are clouds, so visible moisture in the sky, soon after takeoff, engine anti-ice would be on for this departure, as is wing anti-ice. The APU master can now come off. Our ground spoilers can be armed, and the rudder trim we set and check is 0. Now this should never actually be touched unless you lose an engine, but in the simulator, not even in the simulator but just the real world as well, these two dials, these knobs, look rather similar, and even in the simulator myself I have gone to select engine mode selector, ignition start, and done this, which shifts the rudder trim over to the right. So make sure that that is 0.0. Flaps 1 then for our departure. Now we come to the pitch trim. Now the pitch trim is based on your centre of gravity for takeoff. How do we find that out? If you come back to your weights and balance pages, and I'll also show you this as well. So here's the centre of gravity, 29.7, rounded up 29.7. If you just open the weights and balance page, normally you'll probably get something that looks like this. And I do get a lot of people asking me, where did you get the center of gravity from? Well, just badly designed, I think, because you have to resize your window to find the center of gravity. So the center of gravity is 29.7. So what pitch trim does that mean? Well, realistically, in the real aircraft, you would then come down here, and if we have a quick look at this, I'll get the right section. Okay, we see a little white arrow here, and you've got 0, you've got 1, you've got 2. This is up, and 1 and 2 down. And if you look down here, you've got a center of gravity. So if I just open that window again, the center of gravity is 29.7. So we're looking to find roughly around 29.7, which is quite close to 30, isn't it? Which is just there. So these are not correctly aligned for me, because in the real Airbus the center of gravity is 30, should actually be 0. So how do I work this out? I will pop a link in the video description to a little Excel program you can download, which seems to work far better than this. I just don't think these are aligned correctly. So using that Excel program, I'm now going to quickly open that. It is on a separate screen, so I apologize for that, but you can type in your center of gravity, which was, what was it, 29.7. so if I type that in, it tells me to use a horizontal stabilizer setting, trim setting of down 0.3. and the way you can also check that then is to go to your lower ECAM and change it to the flight control page. And you can see I've actually just set that to down 0.3, but as I move those trim wheels, you'll see it moves up and down. So down 0.3, and you can see that is just there. So there's 0, so that would be 0.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 1.0. Okay, so I will pop a link to that little program for you to download in the video description. Alright, so with that now confirmed, we want to just check there's nothing too bad on the ECAM status. Don't worry about the fact that you've still got some blue yet, that's absolutely fine. What we need to do now is run our after start checklist. So anti-ice is on, ECAM status is checked, pitch trim is down 0.3, and our rudder trim we've checked is 0. All that's left to do then is taxi to the runway. So in order to do that correctly, we need to make sure that the pushback tug is clear, and of course it is. He's now gone back and on his dinner break. We'd then get our taxi clearance from air traffic control if you were on VATSIM. We would then, once we'd obtained that, turn on the taxi light. Parking brake can now be released, and our thrust levers can be slowly advanced as we begin to move. Now if you do have Navigraph charts, this makes it much easier to find your way around, of course, particularly if flying on the VATSIM network or any other virtual air traffic control network, as they're obviously going to give you taxi instructions of where to go. This also becomes more difficult, of course, if you are not at one of the handcrafted airports and the taxiway signs don't all line up with what you're expecting to see. Thankfully here at London Gatwick, all these taxiway signs have been done perfectly, which is just fantastic. I love this scenery, and given that Gatwick is a major hub for EasyJet, it's one that I've liked to fly on quite a lot. One of the other questions I get asked, of course, is does the Airbus 320 taxi too fast? Well, I'm at thrust idle at the moment, and you can see the aircraft is taxiing quite nicely, all on its own. That happens in real life, so it does taxi at idle power. So what taxi speed should we be aiming for? Well, no more than 30 knots ground speed in a straight line, and no more than 9 knots during the turns. So we're now taxiing towards the runway, and I've got absolutely no traffic in front of me because there's just me in the simulator while recording these tutorials. In the real world, of course, there would normally be points at which you would have to stop for traffic, and we do have some other checklists that we have to do, and that is before doing our before takeoff checklists. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to stop at this holding point just here, because this next stage of checks that we need to do, you need to do ideally when stationary. If you had got a co-pilot, then so they could be taken care of by him as well, of course. But you're a single pilot most of the time in Flight Sim 2020. I know some sort of cockpit shared controls apps are coming and are available, but for now we'll stop here, and you can pop your parking brake on if you wish, just to make that a little easier. So we need to do a flight control check, so that's basically checking that your side stick is connected. So full left, full right, neutral, full up, full down, neutral, and then the rudder, full right, full left, and neutral. We then want to turn on the weather radar and predictive wind shear, which is taken care of down here. Turn that to weather and turbulence. There's the predictive wind shear. We then want to check that our transponder is set to the correct squawk code if we have been given one by air traffic control. After that, we then want to set auto brake to max. We want to make sure the cabin crew is prepared for takeoff, so we just ding them up here. We can then set and press the takeoff config button. This just checks not only that everything here is alright, but say you'd forgot to set your flaps, or you were taking off maybe flaps 3, which you'd planned for in the McDo, and you're doing up flaps 1 set, it would come up with a warning. Or your spoilers were slightly deployed. In fact, I can show you this. So if I just deploy the spoilers a little bit, hang on, let's just get that going. So spoilers are deployed, and I now press the teal config button. We get an alarm saying speed brake not retracted. So let's cancel that by pressing the clear button. Let's put those spoilers back up, and let's arm those spoilers again. So teal config, now clear, and you can pop the terrain radar on if you wish. Departure briefing, and then we quickly run through. So are there any performance changes? Has the QNH changed whilst taxiing? Sometimes that does happen. If it has, that affects your flex temp takeoff. As your engine out procedure, make sure you've reviewed that so you know what you're going to do if you do have a problem after V1 and you've had to depart. Does the departure look correct in your flight management guidance computer? So if you know, make sure that that all is looking absolutely fine. And does your stop altitude for your departure, if you've been given it by air traffic control, match what you've got here on the flight control unit? Here at Gatwick, the initial departure clearance is 4,000 feet, so that is all correct. With that all done, we can then run the before takeoff checklist to the line, which means we need to check flight controls, now checked. Departure briefing, we've just gone through. Flap settings, config 1, FMA and takeoff data. So that's basically checking, reading out and confirming 132 blue, 137 magenta, climb, nav, blue and standby. Flight directors 1 and 2 both on, and flex temp of 67. Transponder is set, ECAM memo no blue, and if we had the electronic flight bag, we make sure that that was all sorted as well. Make sure you're in arc mode for departure, and then we can continue to taxi to our holding point of the runway. So they're actually things that obviously can be done quite quickly. They won't take as long as I've just done there whilst explaining things, but you can understand why I stopped the aircraft in order to do them. And normally if you're in a line of traffic, of course, then it's very easy to get those done whilst waiting your turn for departure. So we'll taxi to the holding point for the final stage and checks before entering the active runway. And after that it would be the takeoff. So we shall hold just here, and at this point you'd be on the tower frequency, and final checks then before takeoff. We would check the brake temperatures by going to the wheel ecam page. Make sure that they are below 150 degrees C. Brake fans off. At the moment they're not modelled in the simulator, but I'm sure they will come eventually. Get your takeoff or line-up clearance from air traffic control, then check that the approach path is clear. We'd then turn on the strobe lights, we turn on landing lights, we turn on the nose wheel lights and takeoff lights. They're all now set. We'd also then turn on the transponder to on and TCAS, TARA, and turn the dial there to tilt above. We would then turn off packs 1 and 2 for departure. We continue with the before takeoff checklist below the line, so cabin secured for takeoff, engine mode selector normal, TCAS TARA, packs off, anti-ice on. With that, we've got our departure clearance, and we've been given clearance by air traffic control to line up and take off. Thank you for watching this part of the tutorial. The takeoff tutorial follows this one, and I hope you've found this to be useful. Please hit the subscribe button, and any questions, please leave a comment on the video, and I shall see you all soon in the next video for the takeoff. Bye bye for now.